Hi, I'm Cal Leggett, Director of Agronomy for Juniper Landscaping, and in today's video we're going to walk through the process of setting up backpack sprayers for use out in the field. As you'll see below me here, we have 3 different categories of backpack sprayers here at Juniper, along with labels that are color-coded. So our first backpack, the most common one, is going to be our Weed Killer backpack. This is going to be for applications of Prosecutor Pro, Roundup Quick Pro, things like that, our non-selective weed control in landscape beds. Our next backpack here is our Ornamental Backpack. This backpack is used for selective herbicide applications to ornamental plants, as well as fungicides, fertilizers, insect control, any application to an ornamental plant. The last backpack is our turf backpack. This will be used for all applications to turf, including fungicides, insecticides, plant growth regulators, and herbicides. All right, so now I'm going to discuss how to set up each of the backpack sprayers. In this case, I'm starting out with our Weed Killer backpack. Again, this is for the non-selective herbicide applications in our landscape beds. So Prosecutor Pro, Ranger Pro, all of those various non-selective herbicides that we use. Again, one of the first things you'll notice is that each of our backpacks are now labeled with a color-coded label. In the case of Weed Killer, it's going to be red. It includes rates for some of our most commonly used products. And these labels are available on the Juniper Agronomy website by clicking on the Order Supplies link. The proper nozzle to use for Weed Killer backpacks is either the T-Jet 8006 fan nozzle or an adjustable cone nozzle. This really just comes down to user preference and the area that you're going to be using your backpack in. The next thing we'll go over is how to set up the ornamental and turf backpacks. The nozzles on these are going to be set up exactly the same. The only difference on these is the label that will be applied to them. The ornamental label includes common chemicals that we're going to be using for over-the-top selective applications. The turf backpack simply says turf and is colored in green due to the number of different products that we're going to be using with turf backpacks. The setup on these, like I said, is going to be the same. We've got the T-Jet 8006 fan nozzle, and the reason why that's important on these backpacks is that we want to make sure that they are properly calibrated. When we're making ornamental selective applications or turf applications, they need to be calibrated to a certain spray volume per 1,000 square feet. Using this T-Jet 8006 nozzle, that calibration will be 1 gallon per 1,000 square feet, which will help us when we're choosing our mixing rate for these products. The next thing you'll notice is that these both have a pressure regulator on them. In the case of these Lesco no-leak backpacks, the pressure regulator is actually included with the backpack sprayer. However, if your branch is using a different brand such as Steel, these can be ordered separately and added. This is important because no matter how much you pump your backpack sprayer, this will always apply at 25 psi. So it ensures that our applications remain very consistent. You just place the pressure regulator prior to the bend for the nozzle, and as I said, they're both set up exactly the same. So we're going to go over the proper way to fill and mix a backpack sprayer. In this case, I'm using a hose to fill the water into the backpack, and this hose is connected to a potable water supply. By law, we're required to maintain an air gap when filling water from a potable water supply. So we have to hold the hose up. We can't just stick the hose into the backpack, because if there was a loss of pressure in the water system, there's a chance that we could siphon the chemicals that are in our backpack back into that water system. This is a Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services requirement, and they will be checking for these things out in the field. In this case, I've only filled the backpack up to 2 gallons, and so we're going to mix for that accordingly. The labels that I discussed earlier, in this case the Weed Killer label, is going to have the rates for the most commonly used products. In this case, we're going to mix up some Prosecutor Pro. So you would just look at the label to determine the rate to add. In this case, our rate per gallon is 2 fluid ounces. We have 2 gallons, so we're going to mix in 4 fluid ounces. I have my properly labeled tip and pour container with the product name and our address and information, and we're just going to measure out the 4 ounces that we need for this backpack sprayer. You want to make sure that you're measuring accurately. You don't need to add more product to be more effective. The rates that we're using are very effective, and it's a myth that more is better. In this case, more would just cost us more. So we want to make sure that we're mixing at the correct rate. And then I'm going to replace the screen and the cap. And next, you just want to make sure it's well mixed. At this point, I also recommend that we prime the hose to make sure that there's no concentrate left at the bottom, that we're going to get a large dose when we first start spraying. So you place the hose in the tank, turn on the trigger and just lock it in place, and then pump up the sprayer. And you can see what we're doing is we're just recirculating this mix to make sure that it's evenly mixed and what's in our hose is the same as what's in our backpack. Don't need to do that for too long. At this point, shut off the nozzle, replace your screen and lid. And now we're ready to go out and make some applications. So what I'm going to go over now is the proper way to orient the nozzle on your sprayers for both ornamental and turf applications. Again, like I mentioned earlier, these are important to be calibrated. With this T-Jet 8006 nozzle, our applications will go down following this procedure at 1 gallon per 1,000 square feet. We want to have this nozzle oriented so that the fan is perpendicular to our walking path, and you can see the spray pattern when I spray on the ground there. So it's going to be perpendicular to our walking path. We're going to walk at approximately 3 miles an hour, a standard walking speed, and hold the nozzle at about 20 inches high, or about knee height. Then when we're done, we're going to turn around and we're just going to do a slight overlap and paint that in. Think of it like painting a house or a car. We want to paint the turf or the shrubs that we're applying this to. And you can see again how nice and even this went down. There's no inconsistency. You can also see how it's drying fairly evenly. So using this setup, we're going to make sure that we get that rate at 1 gallon per 1,000 square feet. This is the incorrect way to orient your nozzle. This would be parallel to your walking path, as you can see here. And then we see this a lot in our industry where the wand is waved side to side, and I just want to show you how uneven that application is compared to the previous one where we treated it like a single nozzle boom. And you can see on the ground there just how uneven that is. We didn't get a nice even application. The areas they got a heavy application are drying slower, and the areas that were light are drying a lot faster. And what this means, if we actually had a product in this and we were spraying turf, if it was an herbicide, those areas that are heavier are going to have the potential to get burned. The areas that are lighter, we're not going to get good control. So we want to make sure to use that first method where we have the nozzle oriented perpendicular to the way that we're walking. And using that, we're going to get nice, accurate applications. What I want to show you now is how to properly make an application to an ornamental plant. In this case, let's say that it's either got a disease or insect, or especially in the case of things like torpedo grass and other weeds growing through the canopy where we're spraying an ornamental selective herbicide. This will be the proper application procedure for that. Again, it's kind of like painting a house or a car. Like I mentioned, we want to use this flat fan nozzle to paint the foliage of this ornamental plant, this firebush in this example. So we're going to start out by just kind of lining it out. Just the areas that we can't reach on the inside here. Then we're going to paint along this top edge down to here, and then we'll come back and hit this small area that I missed. What we're really looking for is to get a nice even application, and then along the front. So again, this application procedure is going to be the most effective for things like torpedo grass and other weeds that are in the plants, and that application being an herbicide is very dependent on our spray volume and rate. So we need to make sure to make a nice even application like that. This Asiatic jasmine bed here is a good example of where we would be using an ornamental selective herbicide to remove the dollarweed and sedge and other weeds from it. So again, we're just going to be trying to paint this one nice and evenly and in nice even bands. It's going to be important not to step in this product and then track it into the turf, especially if we're spraying for something like torpedo grass, because the Envoy Plus or Fusillade that we're using will cause damage to the turf if you track it into the turf. And that's how you do ornamental selective herbicide applications to both ground covers and shrubs. Now I'm going to show the application procedure for turf. It's going to be very similar to the ornamental application to the Asiatic jasmine ground cover that we already did. Again, I'm using the T-Jet 8006 nozzle and a pressure regulator on a backpack labeled for turf applications. So we're just going to treat this small area here from this pole down to the end. Again, we want to treat this like a single nozzle boom, and we're going to have it perpendicular to our walking path, and we're just going to paint those long stripes. Easiest thing to do is treat this as if you were coloring in a photo and edge it out first and then fill in the middle. So that's what I'm going to do. So we're going to start by edging it out. And when you're close to ornamentals like this, you want to make sure that your spray is not drifting over to them. And that's our final edge. Now we're just going to fill it in. We're going to go about 20 inches over or so just to get that overlap. And we're going to fill it in with parallel lines. And in this case, it's perfectly fine that we're walking through our spray, because the spray that we're applying to the turf is safe for turf. If we're applying a non-selective to an ornamental bed, that's when you don't want to spray and then walk through it and track it into the turf. All right, then one last pass, and that area has been completely treated. Again, using this setup, our spray volume is 1 gallon per 1,000 square feet, and all of the mix rates that we're going to be using are going to be mixed at a rate of 1 gallon per 1,000 square feet, which is going to result in a nice even application with good control of the target pests. All right, our last application type is going to be our weed killer backpack. Again, these are for non-selective herbicides such as Prosecutor Pro, Ranger Pro, Roundup Quick Pro. So this is where we're just targeting bed weeds. In this case, we don't need the pressure regulator. Again, you can use either the fan T-Jet 8006 nozzle or the adjustable cone, whichever one you're most comfortable with. And the height of the nozzle isn't important here. With these applications, all we're looking at is just to get the foliage of the weeds wet. So depending on how windy it is going to adjust how high you want to hold the nozzle. And then you're just making applications to the weeds to wet their leaves. If we're using a pre-emergent, then you're going to be making applications to all of the bare ground to make sure that those weed seeds don't germinate. We want to make sure that we're avoiding spraying the foliage of ornamentals. Also, you don't want to overpressurize your tank and press too much, especially if it's windy. The higher the pressure out of your nozzle, the more drift you're going to get. So make sure that you're not over pumping your tank and causing a mist. In this case, we're not getting any mist at all, and we're getting the foliage of those leaves nice and wet. That's really all there is for the weed killer application. One more thing that you want to be cautious of, as I mentioned earlier, we don't want to spray in the beds, walk in them, track that non-selective herbicide onto our feet, and then walk back into the turf. Otherwise, we're going to track that in the turf and cause burned areas where we step. That concludes the backpack training setup and application video. Thanks for watching. Again, if you have any questions, please reach out to me. Again, I'm Leggett, Director of Agronomy for Juniper Landscaping. Thank you.